The wind, a relentless tormentor, scoured the last vestiges of warmth from Alara's thin coat. It had gnawed at her for 2 days now, a bitter companion since the breath had finally rattled from Papa's chest, leaving her alone in the sagging cabin. He was cold now, colder than the ground she'd struggled to dig for him with a rusty spade. His face serene in the way death sometimes granted, stripping away the worry lines that had etched his face in life. She hadn't dared stay. The claim jumpers, the whispers of their greed for Papa's patch of land, were like wolves circling, scenting weakness. She had lashed his few tools to her back, taken a meager sack of dry jerky, and walked. Walked until her boots wore thin, until the fear was a physical ache in her ribs, until the distant, solitary ranch house of Caleb Thorne became her desperate, impossible beacon. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a thread of hope against the bruised, twilight sky. Caleb Thorne, a name spoken in hushed tones, often with a shake of the head. He was a recluse, a man of the mountains, his solitude as vast and unyielding as the peaks surrounding his ranch. They said he had no kin, no friends, only a string of horses and a reputation for being as hard as the granite he lived amongst. But he was the only soul within a day's ride, and Alara, shivering, starving, and haunted by her father's still gaze, had nowhere else to turn. Her knock, when it finally came, was a pathetic whisper against the thick oak door. She waited, breath pluming in the frigid air, every nerve strained. The silence stretched, ominous, save for the wind's low moan. Just as despair threatened to consume her, the heavy door groaned inward, revealing him. Caleb Thorne was a formidable silhouette against the warm glow of an inner fire, broad-shouldered, lean, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of all the desolate landscapes she had traversed. They swept over her, assessing, unblinking, taking in her threadbare clothes. The dirt streaked across her face, the hollows beneath her eyes, the desperate tremor in her hands. There was no pity, no welcome, only a stark, quiet inquiry. "My papa died today," she managed, her voice raw, barely audible above the wind's rising howl. The words felt too small, too inadequate to encompass the vast chasm of loss and terror that had swallowed her. She pulled her coat tighter, a futile gesture against the cold that had seeped into her very bones. I have nowhere to go," her gaze pleaded with him, searching for any flicker of humanity in his impassive face. His eyes remained fixed on hers, unreadable as a winter sky. The silence stretched again, unbearable, a judgment without words. Alara felt a wave of dizziness, the exhaustion and hunger threatening to pull her into the oblivion of the snow-dusted ground. "Please," she choked out, the word a desperate plea tearing from her throat. Can I spend a night with you, rancher? Just one night out of the cold. I'll go in the morning. I promise." Her voice broke, the last of her composure crumbling. A single tear, cold as the ice on the pines, tracked a path through the grime on her cheek. She braced herself for the dismissal, for the door to close, leaving her to the mercies of the bitter night. Caleb Thorne's gaze remained unwavering, unsettling in its intensity. He did not speak, did not move, merely observed her. Alara felt stripped bare under his scrutiny, every raw nerve exposed. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he stepped aside, the barest inclination of his head. It was not an invitation, more an allowance, a grim acceptance. She hesitated, half expecting him to reconsider, but the warmth emanating from the house was a tangible lure, a promise of reprieve. She stumbled across the threshold, her legs weak, the scent of wood smoke and something savory, perhaps stew, filling her nostrils. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, shutting out the relentless wind, sealing her into an unfamiliar, daunting silence. The cabin was sparsely furnished, meticulously clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its flames dancing, casting long, shifting shadows. A sturdy wooden table, 2 chairs, a rudimentary kitchen area. Everything spoke of purpose, of hard work, of a life lived without excess. Caleb moved to the hearth, stirring a pot that simmered over the coals. He offered her a bowl without a word, the gesture less an act of charity than a silent command. Elara took it, her hands trembling so violently that some of the hot broth sloshed over the rim. It was a thick, rich venison stew, and its warmth spread through her, chasing away the bone-deep chill. She ate slowly, savoring each mouthful, acutely aware of his presence. Though he had settled into a chair by the fire, his back to her, seemingly lost in thought. Days bled into a week. Elara awoke each morning expecting to be sent away, yet no words of dismissal came. She watched Caleb, a creature of quiet habits. He rose before dawn, saw to his horses and stock, repaired fences, felled trees. He ate in silence, worked in silence, seemed to exist in a world of his own making. Gradually, tentatively, she began to contribute. She swept the cabin floor, kept the fire stoked, washed the few dishes, mended a tear in his rough canvas work coat. Each small act was a silent petition, a testament to her worth, to her desire to not be a burden. He acknowledged her efforts with the faintest nod, a slight easing of the rigid lines around his eyes. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the nuanced expressions that fleetingly crossed his face. He was not unkind, merely remote, a man forged by solitude and the unforgiving land. Her own fear began to recede, replaced by a cautious, fragile sense of safety. The cabin, once a place of intimidating silence, slowly transformed into a refuge. She missed Papa with an ache that still sometimes brought tears to her eyes, but the immediacy of her grief was dulled by the daily struggle for survival, the quiet rhythm of the ranch. She helped Caleb split firewood, her small hands blistering, but the satisfaction of the ache in her muscles was a welcome distraction from the ache in her heart. She learned to recognize the subtle signs of an approaching storm, the wisdom of mending a broken hinge before it gave way entirely. She saw how Caleb cared for his animals, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he tended a lame mare, his gaze unwavering, full of a deep, unspoken understanding. He didn't talk much, but his actions were a constant dialogue. She felt, for the first time since Papa's passing, a nascent sense of purpose, a fragile hope blossoming in the desolate landscape of her soul. The fragile peace of the ranch was shattered by the arrival of the rider. He appeared on a Tuesday, a day like any other, the sun high but the air still holding a winter bite. Elara was mending a bridle by the hearth, Caleb outside tending to his traps. The thud of hooves, too fast, too aggressive for a neighbor, brought her to the window. A man on a sweating bay mare, his face hard, his eyes restless and avaricious. Cole Jessup, the name, heavy with menace, was known even to Elara, whispered in hushed tones in the few remote settlements she'd passed through with Papa. He was a land baron, a ruthless opportunist who used intimidation and violence to expand his holdings. He reined his horse abruptly, dust swirling around its hooves, and dismounted with an arrogant swagger. Caleb met him outside, his stance deceptively relaxed, hands hanging loosely at his sides. Elara's heart pounded against her ribs. She recognized the predatory gleam in Jessup's eyes, the way his gaze swept over the ranch, assessing, claiming. He spoke, his voice carrying on the wind, sharp and cutting. "Heard you got a squatter, Thorn. A young woman. My men saw her heading this way days ago, after her old man kicked it. Wouldn't want folks getting the wrong idea about your hospitality." He paused, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Word is, the old man's claim borders my new acquisition. And his girl, she's got no claim at all. Nowhere to go. That makes her an easy mark. A piece of leverage, wouldn't you say?" Elara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. He was talking about her, about Papa's land, about the very reason she'd fled. Caleb's face remained unreadable, but Elara saw the subtle tightening of his jaw, the slight clenching of his hands. "She's no squatter." Caleb's voice was a low growl, even and dangerous. "She's with me." Jessup scoffed, stepping closer, his hands straying casually towards the pistol at his hip. "With you, huh? A man of your reputation. You know, some folks might call that harboring, others might call it taking advantage either way, it looks bad. And bad looks give good reasons for the law to come sniffing. Or for folks to take matters into their own hands. His eyes flickered to the cabin, directly at Alara. A chilling message in their depths. Tell you what, Thorn. Send the girl packing. Or better yet, send her to my camp. I'll make sure she's looked after. And then we can talk about your property lines. Man to man, without any distractions. A tense silence fell. Alara knew what Jessup implied. She gripped the edge of the window frame, her knuckles white. She had brought this danger to Caleb's door, unwittingly. She would not be his undoing. But before she could even formulate a desperate plan, Caleb spoke, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel that made Jessup visibly stiffen. The only thing leaving this ranch is you, Jessup. And if you ever show your face here again, or touch anything that belongs to me, or anyone under my protection, you'll regret it. Jessup's face contorted in a sneer. You'll regret this, Thorn. You can't stop progress. Or what's rightfully mine. He turned on his heel, mounted his horse, and rode away, but the threat lingered in the air, a palpable weight. Caleb stood watching until the dust settled, then turned slowly, his eyes meeting Alara's through the window. There was a quiet intensity there she had not seen before, a shared understanding of the danger that now hung over them both. The days following Jessup's visit were tense, punctuated by the silence of anticipation. Alara found a new resolve hardening within her. She was no longer just a refugee, but a partner in this unspoken defense. She helped Caleb fortify the cabin, checked the fence lines for signs of trespass, and watched the horizons with him, her eyes sharp, her senses attuned to every whisper of the wind. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now laced with a fierce determination. She would not be the weakness that brought Caleb down. She would stand with him. The clash came not with men, but with nature's fury. A late spring blizzard, sudden and brutal, descended upon the mountains, trapping them, burying the ranch under feet of snow. The cattle, driven to shelter, were still vulnerable, and the cold was relentless, threatening to steal the very breath from their lungs. This was Jessup's opportunity, they both knew it. No one would question if a recluse like Thorn simply vanished in a storm. Caleb worked tirelessly, his face grim, battling the elements, protecting his herd. Alara, despite the biting cold that numbed her fingers and toes, bundled in borrowed, oversized coats, worked beside him, hauling feed, clearing drifts, her own strength surprising her. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused, capable. One evening, deep in the storm's grip, a calf, separated from its mother, was found freezing in a drift. Caleb, his face drawn with fatigue, scooped the shivering creature into his arms, carrying it into the cabin. They worked together by the fire, Alara rubbing the calf's small legs, Caleb administering warm milk. In the soft glow of the firelight, their hands brushed, a fleeting, electric contact. She looked up, and for the first time, saw something akin to weariness in his eyes, but also a deep satisfaction, a quiet pride. He wasn't just a stoic rancher. He was a man who cared deeply, whose strength was matched only by his silent devotion to life. The storm broke 2 days later, leaving behind a world hushed and sparkling under a brilliant sun. Jessup had not come. Perhaps the blizzard had deterred him, or perhaps he had recognized the quiet, formidable resolve that radiated from the isolated ranch. Alara stood outside, breathing in the crisp, clean air. The world transformed. She felt transformed too. The girl who had arrived, broken and afraid, had been scoured clean by the trials, leaving behind a core of resilient steel. Caleb found her there, leaning against the corral fence, watching his horses graze on the newly exposed grass. He stopped beside her, his presence a quiet comfort now, rather than an imposing silence. The air was still, only the soft crunch of melting snow beneath their boots. He looked out at the vast, snow-covered landscape, then slowly, he turned his gaze to her. His eyes, usually unreadable, held a depth she now understood. "Alara," he said, his voice rough but steady. It was the first time he had spoken her name. You've worked hard. You belong here. His gaze held hers, unwavering. You can stay always. The words, so simple, so profound, settled over her like the new warmth of the sun. They weren't a command or a reluctant allowance, but an invitation, a recognition. They meant home. They meant safety. They meant belonging. Her vision blurred, not with tears of sorrow, but of an overwhelming, quiet joy. The lonely road she had walked, the profound loss she had endured, had led her to this unexpected sanctuary, to this man of few words but deep integrity. She looked at him, truly looked at Caleb Thorne, and for the first time, a gentle, hopeful smile touched her lips. The world was still hard, still vast, but she was no longer alone in it. She was home,